Well, welcome back to The Heat. We're talking about the riots and protests in Baltimore this week, and we're also discussing some of the bigger socio-economic problems in poor neighborhoods across America. Welcome to all our guests. Again, Terry, let me start with you this time. President Obama said this week it's going to require much more than just better policing to solve the problems in places like West Baltimore. Let's take a listen to what he said.
In those environments, if we think that we're just going to send the police to do the dirty work of containing the problems that arise there without, as a nation and as a society, saying what can we do to change those communities, to help lift up those communities and give those kids opportunity, then we're not going to solve this problem.
So there, Terry, we had the president talking about some of those problems, communities stripped of opportunities, lack of education, other social problems. What is the role of government in all of this?
Well, I think the president is right. The police don't serve as a social service agency. What we need is the government needs to provide more incentives for businesses to provide opportunities for local citizens. The funds need to be available to really put serious programming efforts into these communities such that we stop the benign neglect and really focus on making serious changes. Oftentimes, sometimes folks will come into a community that have no idea what's the history of it to try to create something new. You have to talk to the people who are on the ground, who are really community members to build something. So you need a social change, you need economic change, and you need political change, such that the voices in the community are actually being heard.
Bernard Park, let's look at the example of Los Angeles. After the LA riots, there was lots of talk about rebuilding LA. What has changed in a place like, say, South Central Los Angeles?
Well, I think, first of all, we changed the name from South Central to South Los Angeles, but what you find is that a lot of slow progress. Just 2 days ago, I participated in a groundbreaking on a project that was burned down in 1992, and groundbreaking to finish the last 6 to 8 acres of rebuilding. And so you can still go back and find a variety of places in the city of LA that have not been repaired. You also have the current issues of whether businesses want to return, or do they build on your borders knowing that your residents will go to surrounding communities to spend their money. In the South Los Angeles area, we figure well over $1 billion a year bleed out to surrounding communities. And so there are issues that are ongoing, and I think what the public gets frustrated with, if you use LA as an example, and we talk about poverty and we talk about so many things that are wrong, education, the city of LA has received approximately $100 million in block grant money per year for the last decade or more. Yet our poverty still is pretty close to what it was with all that money being spent. And so it's not only the issue of changing the culture of departments, it's also changing the priorities and the spending plan. As we know in government, if you put no money behind an issue, it means it's not going to flourish. And so it's not enough just to put a label on a door or put forth a program. You have to fund it. And why we can't impact poverty at a greater level when the purpose of block grant money is to deal with poverty and address it in every aspect, whether it's housing, employment, and yet for 10 consecutive years to have over $100 million in block grant money to a city, and yet in 2015 we say poverty has not, the needle has not moved that much. That's where I think the real issues are. What are the priorities in their spending plan? How is government going to ensure there's a long-term ability to address these issues, to stop these knee-jerk reactions and addressing things on a one-time basis, and are these small programs that have little impact? That's the only way I see that we're going to stop resolving the symptoms and eventually get to the problems.
Okay, Terry, you want to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to say that I'm from Baltimore, and there are communities within the city that have hundreds of abandoned homes. Abandoned homes are a symptom, the fact that community members as well as politicians have just given up. If you abandon your home, literally, you can walk through neighborhoods where there might be 50 neighborhood houses in a block. It might be 2 or 3 residents. Those are residents who can't afford to move out. So if you are growing up in communities that look like this, basically what the city is saying to you is that we don't care, and that most people who can get out have chosen to get out, and you're stuck.
And just to connect Terry and Bernard's points, the CDBG funds that come into the city go to gentrification projects. In Baltimore, there's things like Harbor East and Eager Park, which are communities that didn't exist 10 years ago and lie on top of what previously had been public housing projects. But the other side of that is the blight that we're talking about, because I live in one of the districts that has the highest amount of blight in West Baltimore, in the 9th Councilmatic District. It is also a food desert. It's owned by the city or the city's quasi-nonprofit agency that's a development corporation. So you can't even put in an RFP to purchase it unless they decide that they want to sell it, which means that they could fix it at any time, but they'd rather hold it and keep it in parcels so that the developers, who oftentimes fund their campaigns, can come in and buy whole blocks at a time and build new neighborhoods.
Okay. Heather, you raised a number of very important issues earlier on, and I'm wondering right now, do you sense that there is a growing recognition that some of these problems, like mass incarceration, have to be addressed? We heard Hillary Clinton, who says she wants to be the next president of the United States. She's talking about ending this practice right now. I mean, is that merely election rhetoric, or do you think something's going to be done about it?
Well, I mean, make no mistake about it. The fact that people are speaking up in cities like Baltimore and Detroit and Philadelphia, I think, has moved the needle in terms of the discussion. I do think that it is the sustained activism of people who have been affected by this most directly that has finally pushed this to a national dialogue. On the other hand, I am worried, as I know many are, that that we will not do what really needs to be done. It's unfortunately, we've created such a crisis. It's not just simply about decarceration or even changing drug laws. All of that is necessary, but we have, as all of the folks on this panel have made clear, we have created a crisis situation in communities across this nation. And the fact of the matter is we have much fewer resources, many fewer resources going into them now than we did 20 years ago. And so while we decarcerate, while we talk about ending mass incarceration, we can't just see this as a money-saving thing. We have to think about all those dollars that will then need to go back into communities to educate folks, to job train, to help with reentry. And so I'm on the one hand delighted to see that this conversation is going to be part of the presidential debates, I'm sure. On the other hand, it's a little concerning because we can't do it for financial responsibility reasons, for fiscal conservative reasons. We have to do this for humanitarian reasons. We have to fix communities. It's going to take government. It's going to take money. It's going to take investment. And frankly, you know, yes, we have block grants that are going into a lot of these communities, but it is a a trickle compared to what needs to go in. And you know, it doesn't need to go into gentrification. It actually needs to go into real community development. So I want to see some optimism about what we can in fact do with decarceration, but I want to be very cautious that we have to do the whole thing. Not just change a few laws, not just decriminalize marijuana.
Right.
You know, we have to go bigger than that.
Okay, and that's where we are going to have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for joining us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. We'd love to hear from you, so please send us your questions, comments, and story ideas to theheat@cctv-america.com. And we'd like to continue the conversation on social media. Give us your thoughts and comments on our Facebook page. That's CCTV America. I'm Arden Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.